Plato's Crito, an overview and analysis by Dr. Israelsen. So this dialogue begins with Socrates in prison. So a while after the events of Apology, Socrates' execution was delayed because there was a journey, voyage, sort of commemorative voyage being made to the island of Crete, where the Minotaur legend happened. It's sort of an annual thing that the Athenians did to celebrate a certain mythical aspect of their history, and no executions could take place during the voyage. So there was a relatively long period between the sentencing and the execution, which was atypical. Normally, it would be carried out much quicker, but Socrates waited a month or so. So Crito, his oldest friend, comes to visit him. We know Crito is a very close friend of Socrates, similar in age. They fought in the war together, I believe. And so Crito is a sort of a peer. Plato is very much a student. Crito is an old man, same age as Socrates. At the end of the Phaedo, where Socrates drinks the hemlock and dies, it is Crito that he sort of entrusts his last request to. He asks him to sacrifice a cock to Asclepius, the god of healing, because he was now dying, thus escaping from the ills and the evils and the sickness of life, as it were. So his final words and final plea are to Crito, thus indicating the strength of their friendship. So Crito is his old friend, and he comes to Socrates with a plea. So Socrates, as we know, is awaiting his execution, and Crito begs Socrates to escape from prison and his impending execution. Crito says, quote, listen to me even now and be saved. If you die, it will not be a single misfortune for me. Not only will I be deprived of a friend, the like of whom I shall never find again, but many people who do not know you or me very well will think that I could have saved you if I were willing to spend money, but that I did not care to do so. So a little bit of context. It would not have been unusual for Socrates to have escaped. In fact, everyone was probably expecting it. The way Crito talks makes clear that it's a sort of social expectation. The ancient world is a very different place than the modern world. Today, everything's interconnected. If you flee from, the jurisdiction of your state, well, I mean, there's federal law enforcement agents who are looking for people like that, and local state governments will cooperate with your state government in extraditing you and getting you back to where justice needs to, be served. Even if you fly to another country, most countries have extradition treaties with the U.S., so they will fly you back if you're caught there. Some countries, like traditionally, I believe Venezuela doesn't have extradition with us. Maybe that's changed, but for a long time it didn't. Anyway, it's not easy to escape if you have a death sentence in the modern world. But in the ancient world, if you have any sort of position of privilege or power, or if you have friends who are highly placed, then escape from these sorts of sentences would be expected. Right? There's a social expectation that Socrates' friends will get him out of prison and get him out of town so that he won't have to die. And the Athenian government would not care about that. They would have sent their message. It would have been clear. Socrates has to leave town in disgrace. They wouldn't have gone after him. It's highly unlikely. So he could have escaped and lived out the rest of his days, relatively safe, with patronage and protection from friends, wealthy friends like Crito, also Cebes and Simmias, who have come from, now I'm blanking on where Cebes and Simmias come from, Thessaly, I believe. I think they're Thessalians. Anyway, there's these rich outsiders who have come. They're prominent figures in the dialogue Phaedo. There's a lot of people with money who want to see Socrates alive and safe and, out of Athens. So Crito is sort of bringing a collective call to action from many people. He's the spokesman of this cause, but a lot of people want to see Socrates live. I mean, almost half, it was a very close vote to execute. Almost half of the people who were voting voted for acquittal. The majority votes for execution was fairly slim margin. So let's talk for a moment about the opinion of the mob. Socrates responds, my good Crito, why should we care so much for what the majority think? And that's a good question. Whose opinion should we care about? There's a lot of people and a lot of opinions, and we can't care equally about all opinions. That would be to not have a self, right? Because there are so many opinions and so many of them contradict one another that to try to hold all opinions or respect all opinions simultaneously would be contradictory. It's not really psychologically possible. So whose opinion should we care about? The mob, the majority, the most common sort of lowest common denominator? Well, Socrates thinks not. Crito says, you see, Socrates, that one must also pay attention to the opinion of the majority. Your present situation makes clear that the majority can inflict not the least, but pretty well the greatest evils if one is slandered among them. So Crito says, well, yeah, I mean, we have to, because look, you're about to die. You're about to be put to death. So clearly the majority has power to do great evils, to inflict the greatest evil, death. Socrates replies, would that the majority could inflict the greatest evils, for then they would be capable of the greatest good, and that would be fine. But now they cannot do either. They cannot make a man either wise or foolish, but they inflict things haphazardly. Very insightful, thing to say. What Socrates is saying here contains a lot of wisdom, right? They're not capable of evil. They're not capable of good. They're a disorganized sort of rabble. Their opinions change moment to moment. If you try to please them, you will be constantly contorting, shifting, and changing yourself. You'll become a chameleon, right? Common opinion is chimerical, ephemeral, and protean. It's always shifting and changing. These people are not capable of the greatest evil. They're not capable of the greatest good either. They're not capable of principled action because they're not living in accordance with any principle. They're merely going in accordance with their proclivities, their inclinations, their tastes, and their desires. And those shift from one moment to the next, right? So Socrates is clearly saying, no, they're not inflicting an evil. And that's, in a sense, a strange thing to say, because they are about to kill him. But Socrates, in keeping with what we saw in the Apology, Socrates does not seem to view death as an evil. Death is, he's not seeking death out. He makes it clear in the Apology that he'd rather live. There are things he still wants to do. He doesn't want to die. But sort of Socrates is here the kind of prototypical Stoic, and the figure that the Stoics always look to as their guiding star and exemplar. And the doctrine of Stoicism is to sort of let go of attachment to worldly things, to recognize that happiness doesn't come through material possessions or external success, that happiness is a sort of internal state of tranquility that's cultivated by and through virtue. And Socrates perfectly exemplifies this. Socrates says, in the Apology, I don't know whether or not death is an evil, right? For all I know, death might be the greatest of blessings, right? He gives a couple of options. Maybe death is a long, dreamless sleep. And that doesn't sound so bad. In fact, that sounds pretty nice, right? You love those nights when you're just so asleep that you don't even recall any dreams. It was just pure, sort of nothing for a while. You wake up feeling refreshed, right? You have no memory of it. I mean, if that's what death is like, then it doesn't sound bad. It sounds like nothing, and nothing isn't bad. It's not particularly good either. It's just nothing. On the other hand, Socrates says, maybe I get to go to a nice heaven and continue to practice philosophy with the demigods and heroes of old, right? If a person's life, is any indication of their eventual state, then perhaps a life well lived will be rewarded with an ongoing existence in which I can continue to seek out understanding of the world and of reality through the practice of philosophy with all the heroes of old that I've long admired, loved, and looked up to. And that sounds great too, right? So Socrates says those are the two scenarios that he envisions, right? He says, I don't know if death is an evil, but I know that it's evil to do wrong. I know that it's evil to now, abase myself, or to change my, to stop doing philosophy in spite of the God's clear, sort of instruction for me that I need to practice philosophy. That would be evil. So the worst evil is not death. Death is not the worst evil. Death is not, in fact, an evil at all. Death can be unfortunate, it might be undesirable, but it's not evil. Evil proceeds out of a person. I mean, nothing that can happen to me can be evil. Evil proceeds out of actions. Right? When Jesus is walking with his disciples, they start plucking grain and eating it, and it's the Sabbath. And some Pharisees, some scribes, see this, and they castigate Jesus. They upbraid him. They say, why do your disciples do what is wicked? They're eating on the Sabbath, right? This will make them unclean. And Jesus said, what goes into a man does not befoul him. What comes out of a man befouls him. It's our words and actions that are the only thing we should really be afraid of, is evil words and actions, those things that proceed out of ourself. Because no evil can happen to a good person. That's the idea that Socrates is expressing here. All right, let's talk for a moment about consequentialist concerns. Now, moral theories are typically broken up into two types, consequentialist and non-consequentialist. So Crito asks Socrates if he is concerned that he and the others prepared to help Socrates escape will face negative repercussions, right? Their damage to their reputation, damage to their public image. Because, again, it would have been expected for his wealthy friends to bust him out. And if they don't do that, a lot of people are going to be looking askance, like, oh, you must not have loved him very much at all. You didn't even save his life when you could have. So Crito asks Socrates, are you worried about that, right? This is our reputation. Socrates says, I do have these things in mind, Crito, and also many others. So an important distinction arises here between what I'll call consequentialist concerns and non-consequentialist concerns. Okay, so again, briefly, this distinction between consequentialist and non-consequentialist ethics. A consequentialist ethic, of which Epicureanism and utilitarianism, which is sort of the modern form of Epicureanism, these are the prime examples of a consequentialist ethic, which simply holds that actions are right or wrong based on the consequences that follow from or are produced by the action. So Epicureanism or utilitarianism holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to produce pleasure, wrong as they tend to produce pain, which is the opposite of pleasure. It's a very naturalistic sort of ethic, but again, it's one that places consequences in the center of our consideration. Contrasted with this are non-consequentialist ethics like Kantian ethics, Christian ethics. I mean, most religious ethics tend to have at least a non-consequentialist core. Now, there are consequentialist considerations within Christianity, but at its core, it's a non-consequentialist ethic. If you think about the Ten Commandments, it doesn't say, thou shalt not kill, except when killing will produce really good consequences. It says, irrelevant of consequences, it's wrong to take an innocent life. Irrelevant or irrespective of consequences, it's wrong to bear false witness against your neighbor. Those are hard and fast rules, not rules that shift in accordance with what consequences are anticipated. So for a consequentialist ethic, there's really, I mean, at least for something like utilitarianism, there are no hard and fast rules. The only rule is maximize pleasure, right? And the ends justify the means. I mean, that's sort of consequentialism in a nutshell is that idea that the ends justify the means. On the other hand, non-consequentialist ethics hold that no. I mean, certain means are out of bounds regardless of what ends they can get us. Murdering an innocent person, for example, most non-consequentialist ethical systems like that of Kant or religious ethic will hold that murdering an innocent person, taking an innocent life, is simply wrong. And no amount of good consequences that follow from it can change the wrongness of that act. So Crito makes his case. I'm just sort of going to summarize briefly each argument he makes, because I think there's 6 or 7 basic arguments that he makes here. Argument 1 is we have plenty of money and we won't get into trouble. So don't worry, it's not going to cost us such that we will suffer, and there's no way we're going to get thrown into prison over this. We're too highly placed. We've got this. We're okay. Argument 2, there are many places you could go where you would be welcome. Argument 3, it is unjust to let yourself be destroyed by your enemies. Argument 4, you are betraying your children and showing no concern for their education and well-being. I mean, that's a difficult one to hear. Argument 5, you are choosing the easy way out. That's also, potentially biting or cutting. And argument 6, the final one, it will be shameful for me and your other friends to be thought too cowardly to save you. So quite a number of arguments here. If we look at them, we can see that argument 1, 2, 4, and 6 are all consequentialist, whereas arguments 3 and 5 would seem to be non-consequentialist. Let's see how Socrates responds. In response, Socrates says, my dear Crito, your eagerness is worth much if it should have some right aim. If not, then the greater your keenness, the more difficult it is to deal with. We must therefore examine whether we should act this way or not, as not only now, but at all times, I am the kind of man who listens to nothing within me but the argument that on reflection seems best to me. Right? I'm open to being convinced, Crito, right? If you're correct, then this eagerness you're showing is good. It's a good thing. It's worth much. If not, then you're making it tough for me, right? But, he says, you're my dear friend, and I think it's important that I convince you of this, or that I address your concerns. I don't want you to think that I don't care about what you're trying to do, because I do, right? However, I have to do what I feel is right, even if that means disappointing you, which is difficult for me to do. I don't want to disappoint you. You're my dear friend, and I love you very much. But I have to do that which on reflection seems right to me. So you've got to argue. You have to show me through argument that morally speaking, the right thing to do is escape. If you can do that, then I'll walk ahead of you. Let's get out of here. If not, then I have to stay. Socrates continues, I cannot, now that this fate has come upon me, discard the arguments I used. They seem to me much the same. I value and respect the same principles as before, and if we have no better arguments to bring up at this moment, be sure that I shall not agree with you, not even if the power of the majority were to frighten us with more bogies, as if we were children, with threats of incarcerations and executions and confiscation of property. I mean, it's so powerful here. I'm not a child, Crito. You shouldn't act like one either. I'm not scared of consequences, right? Don't talk to me about those things. I'm not concerned with it. Those are bogies. They're boogeymen. They're not real. Later in the dialogue, Socrates makes this point even more pithily. Quote, have all our former agreements been washed out during the last few days? Have we at our age failed to notice for some time that in our serious discussions we were no different from children? Right? I mean, what Socrates is saying here is, this is the moment when principles are tested. I'm facing a difficult fate here. What do? I either collapse under this and discard the principles that I've held, saving my own skin at the cost of my integrity, or I have a chance now to show, to put my money where my mouth is and to show that I'm actually, I live by the principles that I preach. I'm not just a theoretical philosopher. I'm a practical philosopher. I live this. This is the chance to do that. Otherwise, we've just been children. We've just been playing with ideas that we weren't serious about. We've been, kids dressing up in our parents' clothes. So now Socrates does what he does and begins questioning. He says, you can convince me. I'm open to it. Let's examine this, my dear friend. Let's examine whether it's right for us to escape or not. Question 1. Should we value the opinions of all people or only of some? Crito agrees that we should value good opinions and not value bad ones. Good opinions are those held by wise people, bad those held by foolish people. Example, physical training. Listening to foolish opinions ruins health. And there are many opinions about physical health that are quite foolish. If you doubt that, just go online and find a chat room where people are talking about physical health, and you'll find some pretty wonky ideas, things that, if carried through, if done, would almost certainly result in physical harm. Sometimes these are people, deliberately trolling, and sometimes people really just have these ideas about health that are completely off base. So you don't want to just follow any random advice when it comes to your physical health. You want to follow the advice of wise people, those who have some knowledge of the workings of the body, who have some knowledge of, say, nutrition, right, knowledge of medicine, etc. Socrates asks, and is life worth living for us with that part of us corrupted that unjust action harms and just action benefits? Or do we think that part of us, whatever it is, that is concerned with justice and injustice is inferior to the body? The point here being that if it's important to listen to, good advice regarding physical health, how much more important is it to listen to good advice regarding psychological health, the health of the soul, right? Psychological, really, psyche is from the Greek psyche, which means soul. So the health of the mind and the soul, isn't that more important even than the health of the body, right? It would seem to be. Because one can live a good life even with, bodily afflictions and bodily ailments if they have a good attitude and they're able to sort of meet things with equanimity. But one can't live a good life if their outlook, their disposition, and their mind is poisoned with resentment, hatred, ignorance, these sorts of things. So mental peace would seem to be of paramount importance, even more than physical peace or physical strength. Do not speak to me of consequences. Socrates says, examine the following statement, that the most important thing is not life, but the good life, and that the good life, the beautiful life, and the just life are the same. Crito agrees. With these fundamental principles in place, Socrates turns to the question at hand, namely, quote, whether it is just for me to try to get out of here when the Athenians have not acquitted me. If it is seen to be just, we will try to do so. If it is not, we will abandon the idea. Quote, as for those questions you raise about money, reputation, the upbringing of children, Crito, those considerations in truth belong to those people who easily put men to death and would bring them to life again if they could without thinking. I mean the majority of men. Now Socrates is here showing that the majority of people don't exhibit a higher moral consciousness. The majority of people are sort of they comply with social expectations out of fear of negative repercussions, and they conform to social obligations because of the social praise that they receive. They haven't yet sort of ascertained or grasped the deeper moral truths of the world, that there are fundamentally good and fundamentally evil things, and we should seek out the good and avoid the evil, not because of any positive consequences, but simply because by doing so we align our soul, our will, more closely with the logos, more closely with the underlying fundamental nature of things, and closer with the divine even, right? Socrates doesn't have a clear notion of the divine, but he knows what the divine isn't, and it's not Zeus. It's not those arbitrary and vengeful deities. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle have a much different conception of deity, to the extent that they have one at all. It's of a sort of generally beneficent source. For Plato, he calls it the form of the good, and it's the sort of source from which all things come. And it's not an arbitrary being like Zeus. It's fundamentally good and loving, and it's hard to say whether or not Plato's form of the good has any sort of explicit emotions or feelings, or as a person, that's not clear. But it's at least not something like the Greek gods. It's something to be praised and to pattern one's actions off of. So Socrates is here averring to a sort of deeper moral consciousness than most people possess, and consequences are not, they're not important in comparison with these fundamental moral principles that he's speaking of. So he's not saying that it doesn't matter that someone raised his kids. He's not saying that that's not important. He's saying in comparison with what we're talking about right now, which is fleeing from justice, those other things pale in comparison, right? I can't violate my obligation and my duty to Athens in order to do something else. That has to come first. All right, on wrong and harm. Socrates asks, quote, "Do we say that one must never do wrong willingly, or must one do wrong in one way and not in another?" Crito agrees that one must never do wrong. Nor must one, when wronged, inflict wrong in return, as the majority believe, since one must never do wrong. Crito agrees. Come now, should one do harm to anyone or not, Crito? Crito, one must never do so. Socrates, doing people harm is no different from wrongdoing. One should never do wrong in return, nor do any man harm, no matter what he may have done to you. Now we have to think about this, because if we misinterpret this, then we'll get something important wrong. Socrates is not saying that one should never do something that another person finds unpleasant. Socrates is pretty constantly calling people out for their ignorance, which clearly most of them find unpleasant, to the extent that people are so angry at Socrates that they want to put him to death, and they do so. So Socrates clearly doesn't mean, he can't possibly mean, that one should never do something that is poorly received, or do something that someone doesn't like. I mean, for goodness sake, Socrates was a soldier, and he killed enemies. He killed the Spartan foes when he fought in the Peloponnesian War. He defended his country, and almost certainly shed blood. So by doing harm, by saying we must never do harm, I don't think he's advocating for anything like pacifism, right? I think doing harm means violating the tenets of justice. Harming someone is wronging them in a sort of practical way. So I think that's what's going on here, right? So yeah, what is meant by doing harm? I think we have to conclude that what's meant is doing injustice, something like that, because a lot of things, I mean, when I fail someone for cheating, if a student cheats on a paper or plagiarizes on a paper, I will fail them for the assignment. Have I done them harm? No, I don't think so. I've done something they don't like. They would have rather had an A on that paper, but they cheated, right? And when you cheat, you deserve a 0. That's just common sense, right? So I haven't wronged them. I've taught them an important lesson, as much as it might have been a lesson that they didn't really want and they don't really appreciate. Hopefully someday they will, but even if they never do, it doesn't mean it wasn't for their good. So would escaping harm Athens? This is the question. Socrates, if, as we were planning to run away from here, the laws in the state came and confronted us and asked, "Tell me, Socrates, what are you intending to do? Do you not, by this action you are attempting, intend to destroy us, the laws, and indeed the whole city, as far as you are concerned?" Shall we say in answer, the city wronged me and its decision was not right? Shall we say that or what? I mean, if you think about it, if Socrates were to run away, he would indeed be destroying the city as far as he is concerned. For him to leave Athens now would be for him to say, functionally speaking, Athens doesn't exist. I do not recognize Athens, nor do I respect it. That's what escaping would say. This city has no claim upon me. What it decides is irrelevant to me because I will just do what I want. That's what it would say, right? So what do we say in response to that? Crito, do we say, well, the city wronged me, right? It was unjust. Is that what we say? Crito, yes, by Zeus, Socrates, that is our answer. And this really, of course, is the sticking point, right? If the city wronged him, then maybe Socrates has no obligation to stay. But Socrates doesn't see it that way. He sees it quite differently. So the question is it right for Socrates to escape? This is a live question. It continues to be debated today. There's a lot of moving parts here. This question contains all sorts of implicit questions. They can, I think, be summarized in the following question. What is the relationship between the individual and the state? Where state is just, any wider body politic. It could be a city-state or a polis like Athens. It could be a nation like France. It could be, the federal level in our country or the state level, right? Whatever, any sort of body politic. Is it right for each individual to self-determine regardless of what the laws of the body politic are? Is it okay for someone to just flaunt the law when it no longer serves their individual interests? So let's think for a moment about individual and state. Socrates, quote, then what if the laws said, was that in response to the claim that the city had wronged him? This is where the next line is, what if the laws said, was that the agreement between us, Socrates? Or was it to respect the judgments that the city came to? And if we wondered at their words, they would perhaps add, Socrates, do not wonder at what we say, but answer, since you are accustomed to proceed by question and answer. Come now, what accusation do you bring against the city that you should try to destroy us? Did we not first bring you to birth, and was it not through us that your father married your mother and begat you? Tell us, do you find anything to criticize in those of us who are concerned with marriage? And I would say that I do not criticize them. Or in those of us concerned with the nurture of babies and the education that you two received, were those assigned to that subject not right to instruct your father to educate you in the arts and in physical culture? And I would say that they were right. Very well, they would continue. And after you were born and nurtured and educated, could you, in the first place, deny that you are our offspring and servant, both you and your forefathers? If that is so, do you think that we are on an equal footing as regards the right, and that whatever we do to you, it is right for you to do to us? You are not on an equal footing with your father as regards the right, nor with your master if you had one, so as to retaliate for anything they did to you, to revile them if they reviled you, to beat them if they beat you, and so with many other things. Do you think that you have this right to retaliation against your country and its laws? And will you say that you are right to do so, you who truly care for virtue? Is your wisdom such as not to realize that your country is to be honored more than your mother, your father, and all your ancestors, that it is more to be revered and more sacred, that it counts for more among the gods and sensible men, that you must worship it, yield to it, and placate its anger more than your fathers? Now, this is a very strong view, and it doesn't sound too familiar to modern ears, especially modern American ears. The United States of America was founded on Lockean principles. John Locke, the British philosopher who is most remembered for his work on epistemology in the essay concerning human understanding, and for his political philosophy, and most notably his two treatises on government. And the second treatise on government especially was hugely influential and made a deep mark upon Thomas Jefferson and the other founding fathers. So Locke said, that we have basic moral rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, which you probably recognize from Thomas Jefferson's reformulation, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Just a slight rewording. But the modern view, the Lockean view, the American view, tends to be something like this, that the most basic unit of social reality is the individual, and that individuals come together and contractually form a state. Therefore, when the state is no longer serving the needs of the individuals, there is a right to rebellion. And the founding fathers needed this kind of justification so that they could revolt against the crown, right? So they were attracted to these sorts of views, maybe in themselves, but they also, have pragmatic reasons to be attracted to a view like that. Socrates' view, the ancient view, and the predominant view among the Eastern religions and traditions, China, Southeast Asia, and so forth, is the view that really what's most basic is not the individual. What's most basic is the community, with the basic building block of society being the family, and from there larger communities, extended families, networks of people, clans, tribes, and eventually, larger conglomerations of people in cities, and eventually nations. But what's most basic is not the individual on the ancient view, it's the community. Individuals are like the flowering achievement of communities. Individuals grow out of the soil of the community, and the great individual is the achievement of the society, right? It's hence the sort of traditional heroic mode of combat where each nation would pick a champion, one who perfectly exemplified the qualities, gifts, and sort of outlook of that city, state, or place. So I think there's something really beautiful about that view, that we're not ourselves independently of the political and social conditions we exist within, right? If you think about yourself and you take away everything that you have received from others, take away all of the things you received via your language, from your family and friends, from your parents, from teachers, from church leaders, from aunts and uncles and grandparents, and so on and so forth, from the music you listen to, the films you've watched, the books you've read, the poetry you've enjoyed. I mean, all these sorts of things. If you take all that away, what's left of you? It would seem that all that's left is sort of bare potential, right? The potential for a person. But personhood is constituted interpersonally, right? This is why, every child, the minute they do anything new, their first instinct is, Mom, watch, Mom, come look, right? Get the video camera. They want to be seen doing this. We all want to be seen and recognized because our selfhood is constituted by intersocial actions and activities, right? And so Socrates recognizes without Athens, he wouldn't exist. He wouldn't exist as Socrates. Socrates can only be an Athenian. Socrates can't be a Spartan. He can't be a Theban. He can't be a Thessalian. Socrates is an Athenian through and through, right? He says, I've left the city even left than the lame and the blind. I don't even leave to go to festivals in other cities. The only time I've ever left was on mandatory military service. Otherwise, I love it here. I like Athens. I don't want to go anywhere else. For me to flee now would be the basest act of treachery and cowardice. I had an opportunity during my trial to assess my penalty and exile, and I said, no, you better give me the death penalty. For me to escape now, after having the chance to escape legally and going against it, what a laughingstock I would be if I did that. And in staying and sealing his life's mission with his blood, Socrates ensured that his legacy would last forever, and that he would never truly die. And indeed, here we are, still talking about him to this day.